In this video, we'll be starting Chapter 4 and working with our static and media files. And so with this chapter and every other new chapter that we start, we do have to create a new Django app within our project so that we can separate the code of the chapter, the code of each chapter of this book more easily. And so again, whenever doing that, you have to add that app in your settings.py file to the installed apps list, like I did here with Chapter 4. And when creating a new app, also go into that new chapter's apps.py file and update the path to your new apps folder using Python dot notation, just like you see here for the name variable. Once that is complete, go ahead and make sure that for this exercise we need, from the code of the book, the Chapter 4 static, Chapter 4 CSS site.css file that you see here. Go ahead and copy that from the code of the book into the same folders within your project. And in the root of your project, create a new folder called media, and this can be done by using the mkdir media command like you see here, which I've already done, so I'm not going to actually run that, but it creates the folder for you, or you could do it within your IDE and copy this media.jpg file from the code of the book into that folder within your project. We will need them for demonstrating this in action. And to start working with the basic URL functions from built-in with Django, you'll need to import our settings from the Django conf library so that we can access any of the variables within our settings.py file. And you will also need to import the static method from the Django conf urls.static library. We will get to these in another video, but for now, this is what we have. You don't have to worry about the fav icon that is depicted here with the code of the book. You can move forward assuming that your URLs pattern equals nothing, like I'm going to write right here. And traditionally, our project is using the package white noise to help serve up static files on Heroku in a much easier and more efficient way, especially since Heroku works within Docker containers. So in a normal project that isn't using the white noise package, you might want to write your static methods for your static files and your media files right here. And all that's doing is using the static method that we just imported, and it is taking the static URL and the media URL to serve as the first argument of that method, and then the second argument is defining the document root, and that again is looking into our settings.py file for the static root and the media root URLs. I'm adding a plus sign here, and the backslash indicates that this is continuing on to a new line, so that I am still within PEP 8 compliance, and that is the vertical red line that I added to my IDE here. Now, however, since we are using the white noise package We technically don't even need the static URL patterns at all, which is fine. But if we wanted to write them anyway, it's not going to hurt. Just know that if you weren't using the white noise package, this would actually be required. And a much more efficient way of doing this is we're going to set it to debug only, because once you get into actual server environments, there may be other ways in which your static files are served up, in which case this would only be needed for, say, your local machine when debug is turned on. So that is why right now we're going to add these here. So that way we're going to take most case scenarios of where this would be placed. And so here we're again just appending these patterns to the very end of URL patterns, assuming that yours equals nothing. And the same with the media URLs. Now, to go ahead and test and see if this works, we're going to first access the site.css file and then the media.jpg file that we brought into our project. And to do that, let's use the python manage.py run server command. Here we can see that our project is running without any problems. Going to our browser, I'm first going to show you localhost 8000, which returns a page not found, a 404, and that's to be expected. So if you see this, don't assume that your code is broken. It just means that we haven't moved on to the next couple of steps where we're going to first create a URL pattern for our home page and tell it what to do, basically. And the reason why we're seeing this is because we did turn on our static files. If we comment these out real quick, go here, we'll see that with that turned off, we then see the standard Django rocket. So this all indicates that everything is working properly. Once you turn this on and you see this page not found, don't be alarmed. That's to be expected. So going on to our site.css file, to demonstrate that the white noise package is doing what it's doing, I'm going to comment both of these out again and refresh this page and see that we still do see the site.css file. So that's good. That means that the white noise package is doing stuff. But if we wanted to go to the media.jpg with all that turned off, it's going to show us the Django rocket page. Say we just turned static on and left media off, we'll see that we get a page not found for the media.jpg. And if we turn media.jpg on, we'll see that we actually get the image that we're looking for within our media folder. And moving back to the site.css file, to know that it's actually working, I'm just going to write a bunch of gibberish inside this file. Obviously that's not real CSS, that's not going to do anything, but I'm going to refresh this page and see that the changes do reflect in the browser. And I'm going to revert that, save it, and then refresh again and see that it is still reflecting its changes within the browser. So I know everything is working properly. And that concludes this video. In this video, we're going to finally wire up our home page by using the path function that is built into Django. And previously, when we went to our home page, we saw this page not found after we activated our static URL files. And so in order to not see that anymore, we are going to copy over into our project from the code of the book the index.html file. And that can be found in the Chapter 4 templates, Chapter 4 index.html. Inside this, and go ahead and copy that into the same path within your project. Inside this file, it's very simple. We've got our HTML tag, head tag, and a body tag. There's really nothing in the head tag. There's the title, the body. We just got a header, a subheader, an image that points to the homepage.jpg file. And we're going to also fiddle with some keyword arguments, otherwise known as kwargs. So with this image, go ahead and copy into your project from the code of the book the homepage.jpg file found in the Chapter 4 static Chapter 4 folder. So copy that into the same directory within your project so that you could use this static URL tag, which we'll discuss later in this chapter, in order to import that into your template. Next, we will need to add a URL pattern, and that is where we import from the Django.urls library the path function. So in here we could write as our path function the URL pattern that we're listening for is nothing. What that means is that we are looking for localhost 8000 / nothing, versus if we wanted to look up something, we would look up something yada yada yada. In order also to use this, we need to import the template view class, and that comes from the django.views.generic library, and import template view. That way we use that the asView method that's part of that class, and we specify the template name as Chapter 4 index.html, which is inside the templates folder, Chapter 4 index.html. And that is pretty simple. If we wanted to add kwargs, we would add them like so. And within our template, we're defining that as subtitle. And here we're writing a condition. If subtitle exists, then we're going to actually print it. And if not, then we're not going to print anything into the document. And again, we'll get into more of this by the end of this chapter we're primarily focusing on the path, how the path is used, how kwargs can also be used. So if kwargs were used, they would be defined in this manner. Now we can go ahead and run our project at the home page. And here we'll see home page, chapter 4. It's our title, our subtitle, H1, H2, I mean. The image that we imported, we can inspect that and see that that is the actual image. And then the subtitle, which is the keyword arguments that we brought in as a paragraph underneath the image, found here. And since that is a conditional, if we did not write this kwargs, we refresh the page and notice that it just doesn't print that line onto the page. The page still loads, there's no errors, and everyone is happy. And that concludes creating our first URL pattern with the path function and defining that as our home page. In this video, we'll be working with the include function, and this is a way for us to start working with a urls.py file that's found in our chapter 4 folder for app, because normally Django won't look into these files automatically, and so if you write anything in here, it is not going to pick it up unless we include it. And so to do that, we're going to create a new file or new path and call it chapter 4. So if your urls.py file doesn't exist in your chapter 4 folder at this time, go ahead and create one and include the path import from the Django.urls library, the template view class from the Django views generic library, and define your URLs patterns, and go ahead and create a new path for chapter-4 with a /. And we're going to do that for practice, because throughout the rest of this chapter and some of this book, we will demonstrate how to define a pattern that either includes a /, does not include a /, or will accept both a / and non /. So 3 different scenarios that could exist based on your project's needs. Here we're going to give it the standard template view class that we've been using, where we're using the asView method and defining the template name as chapter 4 and chapter4.html. So that means in your chapter 4 templates folder, go ahead and create a chapter 4 folder and copy or create the chapter chapter4.html file or copy it from the code of the book and include just this small amount of HTML where we're defining an HTML tag, the head tag with a simple title, a body tag, and an H1 tag. And in order for Django to listen to this file, we're going to place an include statement inside of the urls.py file, the main urls.py file of the project that listens into here. So what we will also do is bring the same homepage URL that we created in that other urls.py file, and we'll essentially just comment that out from that file. So that way we can tell that the include statement is actually working. But also if it listens to this, that also tells us that it's working. So now in our main urls.py file, go ahead and add the include method from the Django.urls library to your import statement up here. And you can comment out the original path that we wrote for our home page, and then add the include path that you see here, defining it as nothing, and then using the include method and using Python dot notation to point to the actual urls.py file, which lives in the Becoming a Django Ent Dev folder and chapter 4 folder. You don't need to write the .py at the end because Django and Python is automatically going to assume it's a .py file. So now with this statement, when Django runs, it's going to look inside of here for any patterns. If we go to our home page, we'll see that the home page still works, and chapter 4 still works. Now the way that these patterns work is if you were to write something with / in front of this, then any pattern that you see in here would have to have something written in front of it. So if I refresh this page, I'm going to get a page not found. If I go back to the home page and refresh that page, I'm going to get a page not found. But if I do / something / I then see the original home page, and the same applies to chapter 4. Now, the reason why the home page works on something is because in here we've defined the path as nothing. So if we wrote this as something else, then the chapter 4 page will remain the same, but something would be page not found, and then we would have to write let's give it a / and then we would have to write something else in front of it. Just to give you an idea of how these URL patterns actually are used and how you can customize them and even nest them, and these could be nested many levels and layers deep depending on how complex your imports get, and etc. etc. You could even structure these in different files. I would highly recommend you put them in like a URLs folder for anything that's actually URLs. It's just a general rule of thumb for like migrations, models, tests, etc. Admin. You would want to create the folder, the name of the file that you're breaking it down into. And that concludes the include function. In this video, we're going to work with the redirect view class to redirect URL patterns within your Django project that doesn't have to be done on the server itself. And so for this, we're going to assume that you've already completed the last video using the include function, which already sets up your environment to use the chapter 4 urls.py file. So if you haven't done so, please go and watch that video or read through the book to set up your environment to use this file. Inside there, we are going to create a new path that we have to include the redirect view from the Django views.generic library that you see here. And the new path that we're going to create is still using the path function. We're going to define it as mypath/unwanted URL with the / as well. And as the view, we're going to use the redirect view with the asView method as well. Inside here, we define two parameters. URL equals the new URL that we want to point to. And notice we've hard-coded localhost 8000 in here. In your actual project, you may want to come in here and write this as a variable that we'll discuss later in this book, by the way, so that way it's environment specific. Say you're on localhost versus a development server versus a staging server versus your production server. You would want to dynamically generate that part of the URL for you. And then permanent equals true or false. And do you want this to be a permanent redirect or not? And as a matter of fact, this permanent is not actually a required parameter. Now, now we can go to our browser, and we'll go to our home page just to make sure the home page still runs. And now we want to go to /mypath, my unwanted URL. And we'll see that in the browser it actually redirected to my wanted URL. And that's fine that it's not serving anything up because we haven't actually defined a path for my wanted URL yet. Let's say we copied our home page and we gave it my wanted URL. Now we should expect to see and this is where / versus non / is important. And there is, using the repath method, a way where you can write one line and have it look for both. So now with the /, we see the home page. My path, my unwanted URL, and it again redirects to my wanted URL. And that concludes the redirect. In this video, we'll be working with path converters and the repath function. And the purpose of this is so that we can write a URL pattern where part of that pattern is dynamic and can accept any number of characters depending on how you write that pattern to work. And moving forward, we're also assuming that you have completed the video or section on the function include to allow us to work with the chapter 4 urls.py file. So if you haven't already done so, please add this path to your main urls.py file so that we can work with the paths within our chapter 4 urls.py file. And this will be common practice for all patterns moving forward. So in our chapter 4 urls.py file, let's go ahead and add a new path called my path and my pattern that we see here. And so this will use a template view, and we'll just tell it to point to the chapter 4 index.html file. That way we know if we see that home page, our pattern works. If we see a 404 not found page, then that means the pattern does not work. And so now making sure that your project is running. And if we go to the home page, we'll see that we still see the home page. We can navigate to /my path and /testing. And we'll see that the home page is still being displayed. And to show that both numbers and letters will work, let's type in the year 2022, and we'll see that that also works. Now if we only wanted to accept numbers and not letters, meaning we want testing to return a 404 not found, we can leave that. We'll go ahead and create a new path called my year path. Which is this one right here. And we'll define that as a template view and point to chapter 4 index.html. So now if we go to my year path /testing, we see the page not found, which is exactly what we expect. And if we go to 2022, we'll see that it is working. And if we go to the year 2, we'll see that that is also working. But if we wanted to only capture a 4-digit number, what we would do is define a custom path converter. And for that, we're going to create a new file called converters.py, found or placed in the Chapter 4 app folder. So go ahead and create that file at this time. We're going to add a class called yearConverter. Define the regex option, and you can Google how to write regular expression. This would be pretty standard. Here we're saying we want the numbers 0 through 9 and only 4 digits long. And two methods we're going to write in this class are toPython and toURL. These are built-in methods. Actually, these are just methods that we're writing. And the toPython will always return the integer as or return the value as an integer, and the toURL method is going to return the 4-digit value. And then in our main urls.py file, we'll have to import from our converters file the yearConverter class, and we also want to import our registerConverter method from the Django.urls library. And it's here where we're going to write our my year path. So we're going to comment this one out, and then we're going to create a new one called my year path and specify it as year equals year, and that's the first parameter, year, comes from here. That would be this year right here. And then we're also we're calling this path converter year so that when we use it within a view, we can reference it just by year. And then we're going to say template view and point it to chapter 4 index.html. So now if we go to my year path, the number 2, we should save that, by the way, and the number 2, we get page not found. But if we go to the year 2022, we see that that does work. We also see that testing still no longer works. But if we wanted to go to, say, the year number 1, that obviously works. Or then number 1111, that would also work. And that's to be expected because we're not comparing values, we're comparing digits. And so if we wanted to compare values, we'll discuss that in the next in the coming videos, working with conditional responses. And that concludes this video. In this video, we'll be mapping URL patterns to views and begin working with importing keyword arguments into those views. These are custom view methods that we're using instead of the built-in, say, template view or redirect view classes that we've used before. And so in our chapter 4 urls.py file, make sure that you have already created the year converter, which is a custom path converter that we went over in a previous video, because we will be using that again here. to create a new class or new method in our chapter 4 views.py file called practice view. And so go ahead and make sure that exists, or add that import statement for right now. We'll create that in a moment. And then here we're going to create a my year path again. This time we're going to point to the practice view. Using the path function. And comment out the other one that we wrote so that it doesn't pick that up first. And so now what we have to do is go into our chapter 4 views.py file. And if this file doesn't exist, go ahead and create it. And here we're going to import the template response class from the Django template.response library. And we're going to write a simple view called practice view. And a simple view, what that means is that we're writing the view as a method and not a class-based view. And in here we're going to only write one statement, and that's a return statement returning the template response with the request and the HTML file, my practice page.html, and the context we're going to pass in is the name of the path converter that we wrote. And so in here, this is actually the name of the second parameter within this path converter. And that gets imported after the request within your view so that you could use it here. So now what we need to do is copy from the code of the book the mypracticepage.html file found in your chapter 4 templates chapter 4 folder. Or you could create that file and just write the code that you see here, which is a simple HTML tag, a head tag with a title tag, a body tag, and here we're going to say this is my practice page, and if the year exists, go ahead and print the year. That way we write it as a conditional. That way if it doesn't exist, we're not going to get, the user is not going to experience an error on the page. Now what we could do is, for practice, go ahead and make sure that your project is running. And we see that the home page is still working. So now we could go to my year path and say 1066 random year, and we'll see that it is working. But if we go to the year 1, it is not working, and if we go to the year testing, it is not working. And that is to be expected because the path converter that we wrote will only accept a numeric value that is 4 digits long. So if we wrote another 0 on here, we would also get page not found. And so to use keyword arguments, in your view is exactly like we just did with adding them to our views.py right here. To further expand on using keyword arguments inside of views, we're going to run through an exercise that demonstrates how one will be returned as an integer and how another will be returned as a string. And so keep that in mind when writing these and how you want that and how you want to actually use that data within your views. To start, in our chapter 4 urls.py file, we're going to add a new import for practice your view from our chapter 4 views.py file, and we haven't created that yet, so we'll create that in a moment. We're still going to use the register converter, and for the year converter that we wrote, that custom path converter. The new pattern that we're going to write is going to be this path right here. Where we write year path, and then we're using the year path converter, and we're pointing to a new view now called practice year view. So go ahead and comment out the previous URL pattern so that that doesn't conflict with this exercise. And now in our chapter 4 views.py file, we're going to create a new method called practice year view, and we're going to pass in the same request and then year parameter that we did with the last method, view method. Here we're going to add 2 print statements, type year and year, and we're not going to get to this just yet. We're just going to return template response and with the request, and we're going to point to myyear.html, and we're going to pass in the year as context as well. So from the code of the book, go ahead and copy the myyear.html file into your project. And now we should be able to, making sure everything is saved and that your project is running, we will go ahead and navigate to my year path 2022. here we have the year page. And then we're going to go look in our console real quick. This is actually what we're looking for with those print statements that we wrote. And we see that it got returned as an integer 2022. Now let's go back to our urls.py file for chapter 4. We'll comment this particular method out. And then we're going to want to use a repath. In particular, the one that's pointing to practice your view as the view. And we're going to define the pattern using regular expression directly in the pattern, which is how this repath method works. So here we're defining, again, 0 through 9 and only 4 digits long. And within our view, we'll be able to access it by the name year. And here we can actually comment out register converter for year. That way we know that this is still actually working. And if we go back to my year path 2022, you want to actually make sure that you import repath from Django.urls library, as I failed to do so here. So now we can see that we're not getting any errors. And if I go and I refresh this page now, it works. Now what we can see in our console is that this is actually a string and not a number. So that is the difference between using the repath regular expression versus writing your own custom path converter like we did here, which enforces the data type. If we did not use our custom converter and we just went with repath, then in here we would want to take year and convert it into year, into an integer, such as, but we better hope that anything that's in that string is in fact an integer, because if you get an actual set of letters or characters and then try to convert that into an integer, you're going to have a whole separate set of bugs and errors that now get created. And that concludes working with keyword arguments a little bit more in depth. In this video, we'll expand on some of the simple views that we've written to now work with conditional responses. And the purpose of this one is to now check for the 4-digit numeric year pattern that we've written for our year page. And instead of accepting any number such as 0001 or 1111, we want to only accept a value that is greater than or equal to the year 1900. And so to begin doing that, in our chapter 4 urls.py file, let's go ahead and define another myYearPath, making sure that you've commented out the other myYearPath that we previously written. We're going to use the year converter that we wrote, so you can uncomment the register converter path, or statement I should say. And we want to use the pattern year that points to practice year view, such as this one. Now in our chapter 4 views.py file, for our practice year view, go ahead and add an import from our Django.http library. Import the HTTP 404 class. We will be needing that, and we'll still be working with our template response class. So now in our practice year view, we'll be using the year argument that comes from the keyword arguments, and we can comment out the original return statement, and here we're going to write a conditional if-else statement. And the way these work is you can actually write it without the else, and just if this, then it's going to return that, or if it didn't go inside the if condition, it'll just raise an HTTP 404 not found. So if the year, which we're using the custom year converter, so we always know that it's going to return as an integer, as we discovered in the previous video. Otherwise, you would have to make sure that it's an integer before you do this comparison, because if you compare this number on a string, you will be getting errors. So if this condition is met, we're going to return a template response and point to myyear.html file, and again just pass in the year as context, so the same as we've done before. Now the HTTP 404 will be raised saying year not found, and providing the actual year should it not be found. So now we could go to and also making sure that your project is running without errors, as I sometimes get, as we've seen. We could go to myYearPath 2022. I'm just going to reload this page and see that everything still works fine. Now if I want to go to something lower than that, say the year 1066, we'll see the page was not found, and this time it gave us a custom error message, and it's very helpful because we could write whatever we want in there so that it could be helpful to us. The year was not found, and then it's displaying to us the year that it can't find, which means that any number would work, such as 0001. We'd also get a page not found, year not found, and if we entered just the number 1, we'll get just a standard page not found without the custom error message that we saw before. So that is the difference between actually writing it out on our own. And that is how we work with conditional responses. In this video, we're going to link models to simple views and templates. nothing fancy. We're just going to print the information that comes with it. And to start that, in our chapter for urls.py file, we're going to create a new path called vehicle, which we will import from our views.py file, the vehicle view method, still a simple view. And the path that we're going to write we'll use an integer path converter for ID. And link it to vehicle view, and we'll give this a name argument, name parameter of vehicle-detail. Now in our chapter 4 views.py file, we'll still need the HTTP 404 class that we imported in the last video, and here we'll want to import the chapter 3 models, or from the chapter 3 models library, the vehicle class. And a simple view that we're going to write is the vehicle view, and we're going to pass in the ID as an added parameter. If we were using a VIN lookup, we would put VIN here, and this would be string VIN instead of int ID. In here, we're going to write a try except statement. Previously in chapter 3, we learned that if we were to use the get method and we looked something up that didn't exist, what would happen is we would get an error, and to help mitigate that error, we're going to write a try except statement here, raising our own custom HTTP 404 with our own error message for that page if that situation did occur. Then we'll return just a simple template response and point to myvehicle.html and pass in the vehicle as the context. And the vehicle is of course something that we looked up, and it wouldn't hit this return statement if we raised the HTTP 404 first. Now, in order to use this, go ahead and copy from the code of the book, the myvehicle.html file, which is found in your chapter 4 templates, chapter 4 folder called myvehicle.html. Or you could create that file and then copy all of the code that you see here into there. We're just defining the HTML tag, a simple head tag with a title. Here I'm actually going to put the vehicle VIN number on the top of the page as part of that title. So it'll go vehicle, vehicle VIN, and then page with a little number and thingy in front of it. We're giving it a body tag with an H1 title saying it's the vehicle page, and if vehicle exists, and same thing up here, we're doing if vehicle exists, and then we're going to print the contents of that vehicle, and we're going to put them all in paragraph tags, which have been formatted to break down. or it's just default behavior for a paragraph tag. And now, again, at the beginning of this chapter, you should have made sure your chapter 3 fixture has been loaded into your database. If it hasn't, that's okay. You can simply run python manage.py load data chapter 3, and it will load the chapter 3 fixture that you should have also copied from the code of the book into your chapter 3 fixtures folder previously in chapter 3. If you haven't done so, please do that at this time so that when we proceed to this next step, you can actually see data. So now, making sure your project is running, you'll have to run the python manage.py run server command again if you broke out of that to load the fixture. Now we can go to localhost 8000 / vehicle and the number 4. We'll look up vehicle number 4. And here we can tell it's vehicle number 4 because it starts with AA4, as is the naming convention that I've given to the VIN numbers. Here it prints out the rest of the information, and we can see the make of the vehicle is just the numeric number 3, which identifies the ID of that relationship. And that concludes wiring up a model to your view by using a custom query to look up the data. In this video, we're going to practice resolving URLs, which is the process of taking a relative path or object and then obtaining the URL that it implies. And to do this, we'll be working with the name argument for any of our URL patterns. And so, for instance, in our chapter 4 urls.py file, we're going to create a new path. Well, it's not a new path, it should be an existing path. And for my year path with the year path converter, we're going to link it to our practice year view, and we're going to give it the name argument of, and name it year_URL. And so in our views, our chapter 4 views.py file, we're going to import the Django.urls library, the reverse function. And then we're going to use that in a set of print statements, like so, where we're going to give it an argument of the year 2023, 24, 25, 26, and 27. And so essentially what this will do is it'll look up the path with the name argument of your URL, and then it's going to pass in the argument, the year argument, as that path converter, or as the value of that path converter. And so then, making sure that your project is running, we can navigate to my year path 2022, which is not a year that we put in the print statements. And then viewing the output in our console window, we could see that it did in fact print the URL for each of the print statements that we created here. And then we can also do that using the URL template tag, which is found or which is used in the Django template language. And so I went ahead and created and provided a file called my_year.html in our chapter 4 templates. Which you can find right here. And you can go ahead and copy this file into your project, or write the code that you see here. And then within this file, we're going to just uncomment this statement right here. So now we're going to create a set of hyperlinks that all resolve to the URL with the argument that we're passing in. And so now if we just refresh this page, we'll see that the hyperlinks that we just created now exist, and they all point to their relative paths. And that concludes this exercise. In this video, we're going to resolve absolute URLs, whereas in the previous video we were resolving relative URL patterns. And in order to do this, we're going to create a custom context processor where we will be generating the main URL, such as localhost 8000 or whatever our dev environment or staging or production environment URL may be, so that we can use that globally throughout the project. And so to begin, we will need to create a new file called context_processors.py that lives in the same folder as our settings.py file. So this context processors.py file here, create that. And inside of it, we are going to add the code that you see here, where we're going to create the global context definition and return at least the base URL. And we're going to do that by accessing the request object and executing the build absolute URI method found within that request object and the extra parameters that you see here. This is extra practice. If you did do that, you would have to import the settings that you see here. Now, in order to actually register this context processor to work within your project, simply adding that file within this directory is not always going to work. So in our settings.py file, where we have our templates defined, under the options and context processors, we'll need to add our chapter 4 context processors like we see here. And that uses Python dot notation to point to the actual folders and file that file exists in. And you do not have to add the .py at the end. Now, in order to use the context processor that we just registered within our project, let's go ahead and create a URL pattern so that we can use the view. Here we're going to create the my year path with year and point to practice year view with name equals year underscore URL. And so go ahead and comment out any other my year path URLs that you have defined so that they don't conflict with this one. That's fine. And that's another way we can tell it very easily. And so let's make sure practice year view is in our views.py file. And here we're just going to return the template response with chapter 4 myyear.html that we previously written in a video. So that was a previous step. In our myyear.html file that you should have also already copied from the code of this book into your project in a previous video. If you haven't, please do so now. And in the last video we used this chunk right here to print the relative URLs. In this video we're going to use this chunk right here, which appends the base URL that we just created in our context processor as an absolute URL. So let's go ahead and uncomment this out. Unindent that. And I'm using Shift Tab on my keyboard in order to do that. The alternative would be Tab to indent them. Now I am going to copy this URL and make sure our project is running, and navigate to my year path 2022, and we'll see that it did print out with localhost in front of it. Now if I uncommented this out, we'll see the difference is that this is the relative path. It doesn't have the main URL in front of it, whereas this one does. So if this was a development or staging or production environment, this would obviously change. Now obviously a relative URL wouldn't have an issue either, but in some circumstances this is actually important, and so this is how you would approach those situations if and when you ran into those logistical problems. Now we can also do this from the request object. So going back to our chapter 4 views.py file, we're going to import a reverse function from the Django.urls library. And in the same practice year view that we have wired up, we're going to add a series of print statements that uses the build absolute URI function with our reverse method to look up your URL, and that is the name that we gave this path when we created it. So name equals your URL, and the argument we're going to pass in, we're defining right here in line as 2023, 24, 25, 26, 27 as just print statements. And then from the previous video we had our relative URL lookups. So we will go ahead and refresh this page, and then open up our console window, and we'll see that we do in fact have the first set is the relative paths, and the second set of print statements are the absolute URL, and we're getting that from the request object within the view itself. And to take this another step further, we'll go ahead and to reduce a lot of complexity, we're just going to go straight into the chapter 3 models.py file and add a couple of things right into here. That way we don't have to create these models within a different chapter and cause a lot of confusion that way. So in our vehicle model, let's go ahead and add two methods, the getURL method and the getAbsoluteURL method. And within this method itself is actually where we're going to write the import statement. This can be written up top, but it serves other purposes here. And then we will return a reverse. We'll have to import the reverse. We are importing the reverse. So we return the reverse method looking up we're going to look up the path by that name, vehicle detail, and pass in the keyword argument ID as the self.primary key. And the same for the get URL. The only difference is that we're adding the base URL in front of the get absolute URL method, what that returns. And our base URL, we're writing the same function that we wrote within our context processors. So this is just another way to write it. It's not actually accessing the context directly from within this method. So keep that in mind as well. Now in our chapter 4 views.py file, in the vehicle view method that we wrote, which is still using this path right here for vehicle int ID and then vehicle view. Here we're going to write an else condition. The try except else simply means that if the try succeeded, it's going to move on and run these print statements. And here we're going to say if the vehicle was found, take that vehicle and give me the get URL method and then the get absolute URL method, and here we'll have to pass in the request into that object. And as such, this is why we're passing in the request to the get absolute URL here and not the get URL method here, because we're only using that within this method. So now, if you make sure your project is running, we'll go ahead and go to vehicle 4. This is a URL that we previously accessed in another video before this one. We see that it's working fine. Going back to our console, we'll see that it printed the relative path and then the absolute path. And that is how you can resolve absolute URLs from within a model class. In this video, we're going to begin working with class-based views, otherwise known as complex views. And so to begin, go ahead and start by copying the myVehicleClass_1 and myVehicleClass_2.html files from the code of this book into the same directory within your project, found in the Chapter 4 Templates Chapter 4 folder, where you can create these two files and add the code that you see here. And the only difference is in the h1 tag, I added the numeric 1 and numeric 2 to differentiate between the two. Otherwise, they're exactly the same. Now in your chapter 4 urls.py file, we're going to need to add the vehicle view class to our chapter 4 views import statement. This vehicle view class is a class we're about to write. And the path that we're going to use make sure you comment out the other path that we have for vehicle, int ID, and we are now going to use this vehicle view as view class, right, that is defined right here, and define the name attribute as vehicle-detail. In our chapter 4 views.py file, we're going to go ahead and create that vehicle view class as you see here, and it's going to inherit the view class that we are importing from the Django views.generic library. And make sure that you also have imported your chapter 3 models vehicle class. And we'll still need the HTTP 404 class and our template response class as well for this exercise. So moving back down to the vehicle view that we wrote, we'll give it a template name, which equals my vehicle class 1.html. That's that file that we just copied from the code of this book, which you see here. We'll give it a get method, and within that method we're going to just do a simple try except statement looking for the vehicle by the ID that gets initialized in the get statement, and that comes from our URL pattern itself. That is the second value that you see here in this path converter, the ID. And if the vehicle is not found, we'll raise our custom 404 error message. If it is found, it's going to proceed on and return a template response. And within this template response, we're just going to point to the template name that we defined up here and pass in the vehicle as the vehicle context, which we can access within that template. Now we'll also add a post method. Within the post method, we're going to return HTTP response redirect to success. Now, making sure that your project is running, go ahead and navigate to vehicle 4 again, and we'll see that it is showing our vehicle view class 1 that we've written within that document. And in this next example, we're going to overload this method. So we're going to comment out this path that we wrote here, And essentially, we're going to write the exact same path, except inside of asView, the asView method that we're executing, we're going to manually define the template name as a different file, and that is going to be the myVehicle class 2 file. This provides us an example of how we can write a view class, and then we can on the fly overload it should the need arise that we need to do that. Now going back to our project, our browser, we're going to refresh this page and now see that it's pointing to vehicle view class 2. And that was the reason why we wrote 1 and 2 and into those files and essentially left them exactly the same. Now, the principles of inheritance or extending classes can also be done with views. This is a concept that we previously learned in Chapter 3 when we extended or inherited models. Inheritance works with any class that you write in Python. And so in our Chapter 4 urls.py file, let's go ahead and comment out that path once again. And this time we're going to write the exact same path basically, except we're going to point to vehicle view 2 instead of vehicle view. And so moving up to our import statements, make sure that you've imported vehicle view 2 into your file. And moving on to our Chapter 4 views.py file, this is where we're going to write our vehicle view 2 class, and it's going to inherit vehicle view, the original one that we wrote above. And our template name, we're going to give it the same myVehicle class 2 to differentiate that from 1. And everything else will remain the same. Meaning, we should expect it to at least run the try except statement that you see here and be able to print that information onto the screen. So save everything, make sure that your project is running, and let's refresh this page and see that everything is exactly the same. But we know that it's not because we just changed the class right here. And that concludes working with complex class-based views, and that gives you some more options and some more tools to your toolbox. In this video, we're going to begin working with templates and discuss how to use template tags and template filters. In our Chapter 4 urls.py file, let's go ahead and add a test page view class to our Chapter 4 views import statement. And then in our URL patterns, create a path designated for test_page_1 with /. And here we're going to use the test page view as view and give it a name attribute of test page. Now in our Chapter 4 views.py file, let's go ahead and create that test page view class. And here we're going to use the template response class from the Django template response library. Make sure that's imported at the top of your views.py file. We'll also be using the view class from the Django views.generic library. So in the test page view class that we're creating, let's go ahead and inherit that view class and define our template name as chapter 4 pages. So we're going to nest this in a subfolder called pages and call the file test_page_1.html. And create a get method where we are returning the template response and defining the request and self.templateName as the template, and the context will provide title, page ID, page class, and an h1 tag. This will be explained when we get to the template. Now let's go ahead and create that testpage1.html file. So in your chapter 4 templates chapter 4 folder, create a pages folder and then create the testpage1.html file. And here we're going to extend base template1.html. We're also going to load static, and here is where some of that context comes into play. We've got several blocks that we're going to fill in and use that context. Let's go and in the chapter 4 templates chapter 4 folder, create a base folder, and inside that folder create your base_template_1.html file. And here you'll add the code that you see here, or you could copy it from the code of the book directly into your project. We're giving it a doc type, HTML tag, fairly complicated head tag. This is where the block statements start to come in, such as block JavaScript, page title, site container, header, footer. And what a block does is lets you define anything in this template that extends that parent template to overwrite that section within that parent template, unless you're using the block.super tag, in which case you're going to preserve everything from the parent template where you write block super. So in this case, I'm going to add my stuff after whatever is found in page class within this template. So here we have block page class, which basically just adds base template class to what class equals. So in this case, it would look like copying this. And note that chapter 4 is also over here. So in this case, what block super would do is write class equals base template class space whatever this class is, and it would be space chapter 4 is how that would get rendered as class equals within the browser. Whereas page ID, this is literally overriding everything within that. So we look right here, page ID. If we had something here, something would be replaced by whatever page ID is here. And then we have includes. And what these includes do is adds the contents of chapter 4 headers, header1.html file within this block. So it's a way of writing partial HTML files and separating your code, and that can be done for a number of different reasons. So we look inside of our, and you will need to create these, the footers and the headers folder within your chapter 4 templates, chapter 4 folder, and create or copy these files into your project. And so looking at header1.html, all it is a header tag with a paragraph stating that it's the header of the document. And the footer is a similar setup, except it's in a footer tag and the paragraph is the message. And the message is context that is provided the message is provided with this with argument that's part of the include statement. So here I'm passing in footer of document as the message that I can then use within footer1.html as the message. So if you were using another variable, you could put a variable here, some other context. Say you wanted to put the title here, then it would be message equals title. We also have some script tags that are using the static method. This is another reason why we import or load static up at the very top, so that we could write a URL pattern that basically formulates everything up to static, and then after that you just write chapter 4 CSS folder and site.css. I'm using a conditional statement, looking to see if debug equals true. Debug comes from our context processor. And here we're creating in the context processor debug and referencing our settings, settings.debug. And if that is true, then we're going to serve up the non-minified CSS file if debug is true. And if debug is turned off, we're going to serve up the minified CSS file for production, so that it's a little bit more lightweight, but it's harder to debug. And the same applies with our JavaScript. So go ahead and create these files or copy them from the code of this book into your project so that we don't wind up with any errors as a result of not finding that file. And these will be placed in your Chapter 4 static, Chapter 4 CSS, and JavaScript folders. You can see that some CSS has been provided with the code of this book. Your JavaScript file could be left blank. Now let's go ahead and make sure that our project is running and not experiencing any errors. Let's go ahead and navigate to our test page 1 that we just created a URL pattern for. And it looks like I forgot to remove this one from the head and left it at the bottom. And here we have, this is test page 1. In this video, we're going to begin working with template filters and also discuss working with custom filters. And a filter is just a way to transform the value of context within our template basically on the fly. And so to begin this, let's go ahead and create a new folder in our Chapter 4 app directory called template tags, all lowercase and one word. And within that folder, create a new file called chapter_4.py. And inside here, we're going to add the following code where we're importing the library class from the Django template library, creating a register variable that equals the library class. Here we're going to create a method called vehicleMake and wrap a decorator around it using the register variable that we created, which then calls the filter method. And here we're defining the name of that as the same name that we gave this definition, vehicle_make. Here we're going to import the make choices that we wrote previously in Chapter 3 in the models.py file. Here you can see that's this list right here, so go ahead and make sure that exists within your project. Next, we're going to iterate that list of choices using I as the index. And if I equals the value of the item that we're filtering, so it has to be a number, then we're going to try to return the string representation of that value. 1 is the second parameter. 0 would be the value. And so if the value was 1, it would return Buick. And if it doesn't exist, then it's going to pass. And if it iterates through the entire loop without finding anything, then it's going to return an empty string. Now, going back to our chapter 4 urls.py file, go ahead and comment out the previous vehicle int ID path that we wrote in the very last video, and go back to the first iteration of vehicle int ID, where we are using the vehicle view, the simple view method, instead of a class-based view. And the reason for that is because that is the one that is using myvehicle.html. Now, in your chapter 4 myvehicle.html file, we are going to want to use this paragraph right here. So we can remove that comment. And the reason why is because we're using the filter. Any filter is denoted by a vertical pipe right here. And the custom filter that we're using is vehicle make. Now, in order for that to work, we need to load chapter 4 as well as static. Now, what that means is that's the name of any .py file that's found within a template tags folder that's found in any of your apps that are loaded into your project. So now I'm just going to delete that real quick so that I could show going to vehicle 4 and refreshing the page. This is the same page that we saw in a previous video where the make of the vehicle was denoted by the numeric ID of that object, that being the number 3. So if we go back and say vehicle.make and run this filter and refresh this page, we'll see that our first statement still exists because I didn't delete it, and it added Chevrolet because now the third value equals Chevrolet. And that is how you would use filters within your templates. In this video, we're going to start working with custom error page templates. And a way we can do that within Django, and this keep in mind that this will only work for 400, 403, 404, and 500 errors. Anything else, such as say a 502, bad gateway, or anything else may indicate that the problem lies somewhere on the server side or even before that, and not with your actual code. And so if that's the problem, then it can't actually get to the point where it's reading and executing your code. Therefore, a custom template just simply won't work. So to begin, in your chapter 4 templates folder, go ahead and copy the 400, 403, 404, and 500.html files from the code of this book directly into your chapter 4 templates folder. So keep in mind that's not inside the chapter 4 folder within that. We want to keep that one level above. And also there is a base error.html file that you'll want to copy over as well. In that base error.html file is where we're going to define a lot of our CSS and JavaScript, just like we did with our previous chapter 4 base template 1.html file. That was in a previous video. Now, to begin using this, we can only run this with debug turned off. So let's go ahead and set debug to false within our settings.py file. And also, when debug is false, we have to run our Python manage.py collect static command in order to collect all the static files that exist within our project and bring them into a folder where now it's as if we're running on a production environment, but locally. And so it's going to prompt you asking yes or no. Yes, I want to proceed. And just disregard the fav icon in any of these examples. It's pretty redundant how I've added them to every folder within this chapter, but I did that in order to keep them independent of each other. So running all together, you're going to experience duplicates. In a production environment, you can clean this up. Now we'll go ahead and use the Python manage.py run server command. And refresh the home page, see that it still works. Let's go to a page that probably doesn't exist yet, and now we've got our custom 404 page that consists of a header and a footer in a similar pattern that we did in a previous video when building our templates and using base templates. So now we can use base error page templates as well. We look at our 404.html file, we see the same exact structure that we did before, where it extends now base error.html. And that concludes working with error pages.